It's a pity you're not wearing your USSR sweatshirt today.
Well, you know, I think they blew that up into a sensation. There's nothing unusual about it. We have plenty of products that reproduce Soviet symbols. I don't see anything wrong with that. It's part of our life, part of our history. It's our homeland, which has now taken the form of the Russian Federation and is surrounded by the former Soviet republics, friendly countries. Of course, there are always clashes of interest, but that's life. As for this fashion, if you like, I saw after the Anchorage summit how young people here, students at Moscow State University and other universities, wore those sweatshirts. I don't think this is about imperialism, or attempts to revive imperial thinking, as some in the West say. It's simply about history, and this history needs to be preserved, with, if you will, a touch of humor.
The American side noticed your appearance.
Yes, without any hysteria. They simply said they liked it, just as a shirt, as Senator Marco Rubio put it.
And what was the overall atmosphere there?
It was a very good atmosphere, reflected in the statements made by Presidents Putin and Trump after the talks. It was a useful conversation. It was clear that the US president and his team genuinely wanted to achieve results that would be long-term, stable, and reliable, unlike the Europeans, who at that time kept saying only ceasefire. And then, after that, they would continue supplying Ukraine with weapons. Secondly, Trump and his team clearly understood that this conflict has causes, and that the rhetoric of some European presidents and prime ministers, that Russia unprovokedly attacked Ukraine, is childish nonsense. I can't put it another way. The main thing is they keep saying it to this day, as shown during Zelensky's meeting in Washington with President Trump and the Europeans. They continue to demand an immediate ceasefire. At least some of them, like Chancellor Merz, continue to say sanctions must be used to pressure Russia. Not one of them even mentioned the phrase human rights. Whenever they discuss foreign policy issues about countries not in their neoconservative or neoliberal camp, be it Venezuela, China, Russia, even Hungary, and many others, they always put human rights at the forefront, within what they call a rules-based order. But if you look retrospectively at everything they said about Ukraine over the years, you won't find the phrase human rights a single time. Yet the complete ban on the Russian language in all spheres of human life in Ukraine should have outraged those champions of democracy. But no. The fact that Ukraine is the only country in the world where language is outright banned also doesn't bother them. And when some of them said, well, maybe territorial exchanges will have to be accepted, first, they claim it's up to Zelensky to decide. And second, they say they will deploy peacekeeping forces, meaning military forces disguised as peacekeepers. What does that mean? It means they trust the matter of human rights to the very leader who passed laws exterminating the rights of Russian speakers, language rights, education rights, access to Russian language media, and even the right to their religion, since they passed a law that essentially bans the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And they expect this very person to ensure agreements with Russia as he sees fit. Nobody says that before going into negotiations he should at least repeal those laws, especially since the UN Charter explicitly requires respect for human rights regardless of race, sex, language, or religion. In Ukraine, the Charter is being grossly violated in terms of language and religion. Let's not forget, Zelensky said in Washington, I'm ready to negotiate, but I won't even discuss territories, because the Constitution forbids me. That's an interesting point, because ironically, the Ukrainian Constitution, despite the anti-Russian laws, still states that the government is obliged to fully protect the rights of Russians and other minorities. So if he appeals to the Constitution, he should start with those very first articles. All this has been swept under the rug by people like Ursula von der Leyen, Macron, Starmer, Merz, and earlier Scholz. This is well known. And of course, Biden and his administration have been leaders in ignoring and distorting all these facts, which actually underlie the roots of the Ukrainian crisis. It is telling that the European delegates accompanying Zelensky as a support group in Washington on August 18 all said something must be done, clearly reacting to the fact that Trump and his team, especially after the Alaska meeting, began to take a much deeper approach, realizing the root causes had to be eliminated. As Putin has repeatedly said, one of those causes is Russia's security, given that for decades Western promises not to expand NATO eastward were consistently broken. Putin has noted many times that despite promises, there were 5 waves of NATO expansion. And when they say, well, those promises were only verbal, that's false. These commitments were put in writing in political declarations signed at the highest level, at the 1999 OSCE summit in Istanbul, and again in 2010 in Astana. They clearly said security is indivisible, that no one may strengthen their security at the expense of others, and no one can claim dominance in the OSCE area. NATO did the exact opposite. So when Washington's delegates said guarantees for Ukraine's and Europe's security must be developed, nobody mentioned Russia's security even once. Yet OSCE documents demand security for all. This arrogance toward international law and toward solemn promises, often written on paper but then broken, is still evident in their approach to the Ukraine crisis. Without respect for Russia's security interests, and without fully respecting the rights of Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine, no long-term agreements are possible. These root causes must be urgently resolved. The Alaska summit showed that the US administration is genuinely interested in ensuring settlement not to prepare Ukraine for another war, as after the Minsk agreements, but so that this crisis never happens again, and that the lawful rights of all states and peoples in this region are ensured. This was confirmed again in yesterday's late-night phone call between Putin and Trump, when Trump called to brief him about his talks with Zelensky and the European group.
One of those Europeans, the Finnish president, compared today's situation with the War of 1944, when Finland gave up territory.
Well, Finland, after World War II, enjoyed the best conditions for growth and prosperity thanks to cooperation with the USSR and later Russia, and thanks to neutrality. That neutrality gave Finland great benefits, until they threw them away overnight by joining NATO. And when Finland signed agreements with the USSR back then, it was stated they would remain neutral forever, never joining structures hostile to the other side. Where is that now? They joined an alliance that calls Russia an enemy. So if we're talking about territorial changes after World War II, that's history. But we have never sought territory for its own sake. Not Crimea, not Donbass, not Novorossiya. Our goal has always been to protect the people, the Russian people who lived there for centuries, who built cities, ports, factories, who shed blood for those lands. Ukraine itself declared in 1990, before independence, that it would be permanently non-nuclear, neutral, and non-aligned. That pledge was the basis for its recognition as an independent state. If Zelensky's regime abandons neutrality, talks of NATO membership, even nuclear weapons, then the very foundations of recognition collapse. That's crucial. Otherwise, once again, international law will be replaced by rules invented by the West on the fly. We value that, unlike the Europeans, the US administration now seeks to get to the real roots of this crisis, created by the Biden administration, which used Ukraine as a tool to contain, weaken, and even, as they said, inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. As for sanctions, no, we did not discuss them. Whether delegations pay in cash for fuel or otherwise doesn't matter.
Many experts have said lifting sanctions could actually harm us by reviving illusions of dependence on old 1990s models. Instead, we've now achieved technological sovereignty, food security, and are relying on our own technologies while keeping doors open for cooperation, but not dependency.
Overall, the process now looks far more reliable and promising than 6 months ago at the end of Biden's term.
What's next?
We are open to any formats, bilateral, trilateral, multilateral, including at the UN. But they must be serious, not propaganda exercises for the morning papers or evening TV. Meetings at the highest level must be carefully prepared, step by step, starting with expert discussions.
And one last question. Could Donald Trump come to Moscow this year?
He has an invitation. President Putin confirmed it at the Alaska press conference, and Trump said it would be very interesting.
Thank you very much.
It will